Today let's deal with the poem Dust of Snow by Robert Frost. John F. Kennedy spoke of Robert Frost, that Frost bequeathed to his nation and his people an imperishable collection of poetry which would continually give joy and understanding to the people of America for generations. He spoke of Frost as a political poet, a poet whose poetry would cleanse the politics of the nation. Wherever man became arrogant, it was poetry who would show him his limitations. Kennedy felt that Frost's poetry protected power from power itself. Power makes man arrogant, and when he goes into poetry, poetry shows him that he is insignificant. He is only a tiny part of the vastness of nature. Power also makes man selfish, such that he feels that he need not concern himself with all that is going around him. His interest does not go into those areas which do not benefit him. And that is where poetry teaches him his own superiority, of how rich and how diverse is his existence, that he has to and it is his duty to concern himself with all that is around him. So this is the sort of poetry that Frost wrote. Kennedy said that where politics corrupts, poetry cleanses. So Robert Frost, if you look at his poems, he was a symbolic poet. All his poems are written with nature in the background. So he wrote very much about the landscape of New England. That was his primary influence. All his life he had been a farmer. Throughout his life he had been a farmer. He was also a teacher. But he always says that farming was the part of his life that influenced him in his writings. So you will always see elements of nature in his poetry. But then we cannot call him only a regional poet, because his themes were universal, themes which could be applied to any part of the world. His poetry could be called as very deeply infused with psychological complexity, deep irony, ambiguity, very rich ambiguity. So at the same time as being a regional poet, he was also a poet for the entire world, a very universal poet. His language could be called the language that is spoken by people. So he comes under a modern poet, because it is the spoken language, the normally spoken English that he wrote his poems in. Yet he adhered to tradition because they were all in metric form. So let's now go into the poem Dust of Snow by Robert Frost. The way a crow shook down on me the dust of snow from a hemlock tree. So we see here that the poet is walking through a woody path in his New England, and when he is walking, there is a crow sitting on a hemlock tree, and the crow shook a little bit of dust of snow, just the dust of icy snow, onto the poet. So let's see what happens. Has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I rued. So this particles of snow that has fallen on the poet, it has given him a change of mood. It has suddenly brightened up his day and saved that part of a day which he had started with regret. To rued means to regret, to have resentful feelings, to be despondent, desperate, sad. So we know that the poet was not in a good mood as he walked down that path. He was, thinking hard on something. And that is when this snow, this little bit of nature falls on him. So now if I ask you to tell me, what kind of bird would you put in poetry? What is the sort of bird that would inspire poetry? You would tell me the bold falcon, or the lovely colorful peacock, or the lovely beautiful canary bird, the fast and tiny agile thrushes, the sparrow. But nobody speaks of a crow. It is quite ironic that a crow is brought here. And again, when you are asked to name a tree that inspires poetry, romance, philosophy, the tree that comes to mind would be the maple, the pine, the fir tree, the banyan tree, so many other tree, but hardly the hemlock tree. So you see here the use of hemlock tree and crow. Both are two symbols which are hardly ever used to bring anything good. So there you see that this crow has just uh, put some dust of snow, and immediately the poet's mood is changing. So this reminds us definitely of when oft upon my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. This is what William Wordsworth also says. He saw a field of daffodils, and that picture was stored in his brain, in his memory. And later, when he was in a pensive mode, when he was in a thoughtful mode, when he was sad, they flashed upon his inward eye and instantly changed his mood. So, here also, the very similar situation is shown. That dust of snow works as if it were particles of magic dust. Cold magic dust has been sprinkled on our poet, that from that despondent mood he suddenly becomes happier, gladder of his own existence, of the life around him. The rhyme scheme of the poem is ABAB, CD. The devices used here are definitely symbolism. Snow usually symbolizes something pure, a new beginning, a new season, purity. Then the crow is usually used to symbolize something evil, bad, the harbinger of sorrow. Like Edgar Allan Poe's Raven is an example of a messenger of sadness or evil or horror. And the hemlock tree also definitely puts to mind with its poisonous flowers, it puts to mind evil. But here they symbolize the part of nature, as Wordsworth calls nature, his nurse, his friend, his guardian. Here, the crow and the hemlock tree are both part of nature that is beckoning man ever to a simpler, uncomplicated, richer life. So it is a symbolic poem. Then sh- uh, it is there is alliteration, saved some part. So and imagery, definitely the imagery. You can imagine the picture of that snowbound land, of that woody path in New England where the poet is walking quietly through the street in a deep, very deep in his thoughts. So, this quite often happens to all of us, that when we are in nature, maybe just the gargling sound of a stream, the raindrops on the roof, all these little elements of nature make us come out of our reverie, our thoughts, and bring us into a present glad mood. So, that is an ability that nature has. Some of the other famous works, noted works of Robert Frost are The Mending Wall, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, The Tree by My Window, Acquaintance of a Night, and The Outright Gift. So, all his poems are very famous. He was the poet laureate of America of his times. Thank you. Dust of Snow by Robert Frost. The way a crow shook down on me the dust of snow from a hemlock tree has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I had rued.